Hey folks, this is Matt Rainwater, and today I'm going to lay out some panels, right? I'm going to lay out some panels in preparation for this next episode of Trailer Park Warlock I'm going to be working on. Obviously, not going to spoil anything for y'all, so it's actually going to be kind of boring, let's be frank, because it's just squares and rectangles. There's nothing else. There will be nothing else that you'll get to see during this talk and draw. I'm literally just going to be doing this action and then also undoing what I'm doing, right? Because I'll then go, oh, I don't know, that doesn't work. And maybe right now what we could do is just sort of talk about what I'm figuring out in this process, right? So paneling is kind of interesting because main thing, I would say the main objective, right, in laying out panels. And what makes this unusual, and I've talked about this before, and we'll continue to talk about this because this is my life, and this is what I do, and this is what I think about, but I have to balance between making a webtoon and a printed book. Now, I haven't printed any of the Trailer Park Warlock books yet, right? But I intend to. It's something that is on my list of objectives to accomplish. And so when I started this whole story out, right, I started out with the idea that this was going to be a printed book. And in fact, when I first made Trailer Park Warlock, I had no intention of it being a webtoon. I didn't really know what webtoon was at the time. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something that I was thinking about. And then a friend had recommended it to me, right? And I think I've talked about that story a fair amount. But anyway, point is I got around to making it a webtoon. And the thing about a webtoon is webtoon's it's a different format. It's a very different format from making a print comic. And print comics was what I was basically trained to learn and to understand. Like all my coloring techniques come from coloring within the CMYK range as opposed to RGB if you're doing digital comics like Webtoon. How I lay out my stories is entirely based on, doing it for print comics. So I have to figure out how to balance those two things together. And so what that means is that I have a very defined boundary at which I can make panels, right? Like I can't do wide shots. I'll just draw out a wide shot. What a wide shot would be. Hold on real quick. If you hear a lot of noise, there are people out in the pool because it's Memorial Day and they're doing people things in the pool. So a wide shot, right, would be like this, It would be a huge horizontal shot, right, where you get like a wide angle lens sort of perspective of what's going on. I love wide shots. I just can't do them if I'm drawing webtoon. It's just not something you do because your entire perspective, right? Your entire format is contained within a smartphone screen format, which is vertical, for better or worse. I mean, I'm a little annoyed by it sometimes, right? Because there have definitely been shots from like, this would be better as a wide shot. Certainly you see this in the very first season of Trailer Park Warlock, because that entire first season was written with it only being a print book in mind, and I had to do this whole song and dance, right, converting it over into webtoon. And even then, there were still some shots that didn't really translate all that well, and you would see them. If you go back over season 1, you'll find them because they'll be very tiny little horizontal shots that look like they should be much bigger. A particular shot that comes to mind is in the episode when Jake Skull and Buddy starts going, basically exploding, right? He's getting really big and all this other stuff's happening, and there's a bunch of shots. There's a lot of those episodes have a lot of wide angle shots, and so because I'm trying to convey the enormity of Buddy, right, in the print comic, which means it will look really good in the print comic, and the way it gets translated into webtoon, it doesn't look as good to me, right? So it took me several seasons to adjust to that. So season 2 was one where I started adjusting all of my panel, and I'll do this in a moment, right after I save this. I started adjusting all of my panel arrangements. Hold on, I want to make a new page before I do this because I want to show you all what I'm about to say. In season 2, I adjusted all my panel arrangements. I'm keeping y'all hanging because let me set it up just so I can show y'all. One more time. In season 2, I adjusted all my panel arrangements to be 6 squares like this. Just going to do it real quick. So you'll notice that there are a lot of compositions like this in season 2, because this was my, okay, here I'm taking a step forward for trying to better accommodate what Webtoon's looking for, right? And it worked better. But what I discovered over the course of season 2 was that all those square shots, they worked, the images worked fine. All the image content worked fine. What did not work fine was that I would regularly find instances where the text would not, like the dialogue, the word balloons would not fit very well into what I was trying to do. And it wasn't the biggest problem in the world, right? But me being an artist and kind of obsessed with trying to get better and better, right? And also making a better translation between the two formats, something that is not an easy objective at all. What I opted to do by season 3, right? And I'm going to just open another instance so I can show you what I'm about to say. Season 3, hold on, I'm going to open up page 12 too. I did zero preparation for this. I don't know if you can tell. So for season 3, what I did, let me set it up real quick, it'll take 2 seconds. I made everything kind of conform to a 9-panel page layout. If this will cooperate with me, I can show you what a 9-panel page layout is. Not very complicated. A little less like that, a little more like this. Right? 9 panels, like so. This works pretty well for translating between webtoon and print comics. It's extremely simple, right? To take, you just rectangle lasso your panel, copy it, paste it into your Photoshop document. You're done. That's it. It's very simple, but it's also boring. That's the other problem. That was the other problem with the 6-page or the 6-panel layout, right? It was compositions would get stale and boring after a while because you keep repeating the same thing over and over again. So I just realized something. I'm going to do something real quick here. Page 12. So, how do you get around that staleness, right? Fortunately, I've had, you know, I'm going to preface this by saying, like, this would be a real big issue if my entire exposure to comics was all Western comics, right? Was all, like, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, American-style comics, because they don't really, they've always been very format, what's the way to put it? They're not very playful format for most of the history of Western comics. It didn't really change until it didn't really change until artists started getting exposed to more manga, because manga really really messed around with paneling format, really experimented, tried out new things. I mean, even from the very beginning, I mean, you can see books by Osamu Tezuka that he was way ahead of the curve in terms of just messing around with like what you could do with a page. Whereas in the United States at that same time, there really was nothing going on. It was all 6-panel, like I showed y'all earlier, right? The 6-panel layout, the 9-panel layout. Maybe every once in a while you have a splash page, and that was about as experimental as it got. Whereas, you know, in Japan, Osamu Tezuka, he's doing all kinds of wild compositions that for whatever reason, nobody, I guess because there wasn't an exposure to it or what, nobody over here in the United States was like messing around with that. So anyway, all that I prefaced, right, was just to say, like, I fortunately had a lot of exposure to Osamu Tezuka, so I had some ideas of like, okay, there are ways to get around this and make more interesting compositions for the page. And granted, I mean, it's kind of an odd thing, right? Because I haven't printed any of these books yet. I'm kind of, at the moment, I'm kind of just doing it for me. I'm kind of just doing it for spurring my own creativity, which it is useful in that way. But I will pat myself on the back when we finally do get to printed books. All that is to say, I don't think that this is a problem that exists in the same way that it did previously, right? And maybe this is a non-problem, but like I think that had Webtoon started to exist before, I guess that's impossible because Webtoon is a South Korean company, so it's like I think it just kind of goes hand in hand that people can learn and adjust to these new formats because we're exposed to all kinds of different ways of approaching the medium, right? And so that's what helped inspire me to figure out how to lay out comics pages like this in a way where it works both for comics or for printed comics and for Webtoon. And like I said, like I've just explained to y'all, not the easiest thing in the world. And also, quite frankly, the way that I lay out Webtoon panels is actually kind of boring in comparison to the way a lot of other Webtoon artists who make comics specifically for Webtoon do it. They're engaging with that format in ways that are more, I think, are more creative with that specific format, but would be very difficult to translate into print comics. Not that it couldn't be done, it would just be more difficult. At least that's my opinion. I mean, granted, you know, another thing in my creative process is I am trying to streamline it as much as possible so that I can do it quickly given the resources that I have, which those resources are just me, myself, and I. You know, like, it's a one-man show currently on creating this Webtoon. And because of that, I have to come up with solutions that fit that particular difficulty or challenge or whatever you want to call it. And just so y'all know, whenever I'm looking off to the side, I'm looking at my sketchbook here, because that's where I have my thumbnails, and I'm not going to show y'all any of these thumbnails because this is a chapter that is extremely spoiler heavy. And I mean, quite frankly, they're kind of all spoiler heavy from here to the end of the series. So anyway, I'm going to see if I have anything else to talk with y'all about in regards to this subject before I let y'all go. But I thought that this was an interesting topic to talk about. I think that it's an interesting, for me, it's a unique challenge, right? I've never had to do it until now. And I'm glad that I get the opportunity to take the challenge because it helps me grow creatively. It helps me grow creatively in ways that I never even thought I would have to. Because there was a while, you know, for years, I started off with this idea of like, oh, you know, you publish web comics basically the same way. You just post pages that you're going to ultimately print. And when Webtoon came around, it really changed the whole approach, and it changed it in a way that I think is fundamental. Because it's kind of weird now, because it's almost like the print comic has become just like a nice little collector's item, and the actual thing that you want is the Webtoon. Because the Webtoon, or, you know, I say Webtoon, there's Tapas, there's a lot of other different platforms that you can do the same thing on, but the format, the Webtoon style format is it's so much better for reading quickly. It's a more streamlined way of reading, it seems like to me, because you just scroll through it and you're going one panel to the next. And I would say that there are negatives too, potentially, versus like being able to take in an entire comic page. I think when you have an entire comic page to look at, you have more time to appreciate the art. You don't get sucked into the story as immediately. So that's the trade-off. Because I think and I think this is why you see so many different kinds of stories in Webtoon all have sort of the same mechanics to them, where they're these very like enthralling page turner type stories, because it's very easy to get sucked in when you have that format where you just keep scrolling, you know, next panel to the next panel to the next panel. It's very immersive. At the same time, one of the issues with immersiveness, or with that style of immersiveness, is that you're running through the story, you're running through the art. The art almost becomes more ancillary to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's also why a lot of Webtoons tend to be more dialogue heavy versus, you know, action. There's plenty of action Webtoons, but I think, you know, you look at the ones, or you look from a statistical perspective, how many become popular, they tend towards the more dialogue, character-centric stories. And I think that has something that I suspect, I don't know this, I'm certainly an outlier in this, in the kind of story that I'm writing, but I suspect that that's why you see less backgrounds in Webtoon art. You see way more focus on the character models and all that stuff, in the character animation or the posing and stuff like that, because it's more, you want to be more emotionally intimate when you can't take in as much graphic information because you're going through it so fast. That being said, me, you know, for those of y'all who are reading this comic and know it very personally, like I said earlier, I'm kind of an outlier in that regard. Like I'm doing things very differently from that model, for better or for worse. Like I don't know if it's necessarily a winning model, right? It takes me longer to produce pages, which means it takes me longer to produce episodes, which means, you know, they come out slower, and it requires more time for people to take in the story, so these stories are not as, for lack of a better word, addictive, or as habit forming, or as the hook doesn't sink in as quickly or as deep as opposed to, you know, something like a Lore Olympus or X number of other romance type stories, which seem to do really well in Webtoon. And like I said, and this is a whole theory that I'm coming up with here, like I said, I think the format just suits those kinds of stories better. And that's not a good or bad thing. It's just a thing, right? It's just observationally, if you look at it, like, and I think that's why Webtoon will often stick towards more, you know, promoting more of those kinds of stories and having more of those kinds of stories. Anyway, that's a whole set of things that I've thought about, you know, as I've been working on this story, because you can't help but think about it when you're trying to format your story in such a way to fit within the rules that are bound within the physical format. And that's a really curious thing, because it's almost like the physical format determines the story you're going to make to a certain extent. It certainly determines how you think about pacing. It determines how you think about how you do establishing shots. It determines how you think about how much time are you going to spend on drawing backgrounds, or how much dialogue can you fit, right? And all that ultimately affects the overall story in ways that you would not even initially consider. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave y'all with that. That's what's been on my mind. Anyway, I hope y'all are having a good one, and we will talk again soon. Thanks for hanging out. If y'all enjoy these talk and draw videos, please give this video a like, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe. Helps me out. And leave a comment. I'd love to talk with y'all. Anyway, I will talk with y'all later. We'll do another of these videos very soon. But until then, y'all have a good day, and bye.